protesting. It was scary. It's a riot police there. It looked like Russia today.
Yeah.
They were beating people with clubs. They're literally beating people with clubs today. It was like a scene out of Nazi Germany. We leave it. It's scary what's happening to our country. Okay, so we had a Gemara on Friday that talks about Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said that all of the days of Yom Tov that you're allowed to bring a korban chagiga are just a makeup for day one. The day of Chiyuv to bring the korban chagiga is day one. The rest of the week is merely a makeup. And the Gemara wanted to, on its own, offer a halacha that would be consistent with Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara wanted to say that according to Rabbi Yochanan, if somebody was potter on the first day of Yom Tov from bringing a chagiga, for instance, he was a chiger, he had a problem walking, and therefore he's potter. So if he's potter from the main day that triggers his chiyuv, then he surely shouldn't have to make it up because he was potter on the day that he was mechuyev. That was the chiddush that the Gemara wanted to say according to Rabbi Yochanan. That since all the days just make up for day one, if someone was potter on day one, then he's not mechuyev to make it up. Tosfos actually raises a question: what about the opposite scenario, where he was chayiv on day one, but on day two he's potter? So he was fine and healthy on day one, and on day two he became a chiger. Since the chiyuv is triggered by day one, not by day two is just a makeup day. Maybe he would be mechuyev to bring the korban on the second day, even though on the second day is a chiger. However, the Gemara says you cannot say that. You cannot say that Rabbi Yochanan holds that just because you couldn't bring the korban on your main day, therefore you're potter from bringing it on the makeup day. The reason why you can't say that is because Rabbi Yochanan himself said something explicitly that would prove that he doesn't agree with that svara. Because Rabbi Yochanan said, if somebody was a nazir and his nazir got disturbed because he became tamei meis, so the halacha is he has to go through these 7 days of tahira, and after the 7 days of tahira, he goes to the mikvah the evening after the 7th day, and then on the 8th day in the morning he brings karbanos, and then he can start his nazirus again. And the Gemara tells us that Rabbi Yochanan holds, what happens if somebody became tamei the night after the 7th day? He became tamei the night after the 7th day. Since the night is still a time where you cannot bring a korban yet, because the korban can only be brought on the 8th day in the morning, not the evening before the 8th day. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yochanan said, if someone becomes tamei then, we say that it's as if he completed his first set of 7, and therefore he'll have to bring a korban for the first set of 7. And we look at it that this tumah is a new tumah that already was in his new cycle of nazirus, and therefore he'll have to go through another 7 days of tahira and bring another set of karbanos. So you see clearly from Rabbi Yochanan that even though he was not able to bring a korban the night after the 7th day, nevertheless it still needs tashlumin. He'll still have to bring that korban later when he becomes tahar from his second bout with tumah. So that proves our theory wrong in Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara said, no, it doesn't necessarily prove our theory wrong in Rabbi Yochanan, because maybe Rabbi Yochanan holds that Laila Eine Mechusar Zman. Maybe Rabbi Yochanan holds that the reason why, if someone became tamei the night after the 7th, is because the night after the 7th, he was already royal to bring a korban. Once he goes to the mikveh and he has the evening arrive after the 7th day, he's already royal to bring a korban. You can't bring a korban at night. That's merely a technicality. But we say that the chiyuv to bring his korban had already been triggered, and therefore it has no shaykhs to our shayla, because he was royal to bring a korban. When he became tamei, he was royal to bring a korban, and that's why he needs to bring 2 korbanos, one for his first tumah and one for his second tumah. But in our case, where someone was a chiger, he was completely not royal to bring the chagiga, and therefore he would be potter from bringing a makeup chagiga. That's what the Gemara said in Rabbi Yochanan, and that's the point that we were up to. And that is on the Gemara where it says, Kasav Rabbi Yochanan, Laila eine mechusher zman. Rabbi Yochanan Sovar, Laila is not mechusher zman, and therefore, if someone becomes tamei the night after the 7th, he was already mechuyev the carbon for the first set of tumah, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan says. He brings 2 karbanos. But in the case of chiger, he would agree with what the Gemara said, that he would not have to bring a makeup carbon, if he was a chiger on the first day. So, frank the Gemara. The Gemara quoted a halacha that Rabbi Yochanan also opined on, and this was a question of zav. Now, the halacha is a zav who sees one re'iyah is merely like a balkari. A zav who sees a second re'iyah has to count shuva nekiyim, and the zav who sees the third re'iyah has to count shuva nekiyim and has to bring a carbon after his tahira. So he would count shuva nekiyim, just like the 7 days of someone who was tamei mace in the case of the nazir. And after the 7th day, he would go to the mikveh. He would be tar, and the next morning, the 8th day in the morning, is when he would bring his karbanos. But Rabbi Yochanan said that if someone saw there was a zav counting his shuva nekiyim, and he succeeded in completing the 7 days, and he went to the mikveh, and now it's the night before the 8th day, he's preparing to bring his karbanos the next morning. He had a re'iyah at night. They had a re'iyah at night. Rabbi Yochanan said, "Ushtayim b'yoyim," and he had 2 re'iyahs the next day, which is a total of 3. So now he has to count another set of Sheva Nekiyim. But the question is, do we say that it's like one long Tumah continuing on from his first set of Tumah Zav, or do we say at night it was a new Tumah and he has to bring 2 separate karbonos? So Rabbi Yochanan said, Ra achas balayla, ushtayim b'yoyim. The night after the 7th day, he had 1 re'iyah, and then the next morning in the 8th day, he saw 2 re'iyahs. Maybe he'll have to bring 2 sets of karbonos, because the re'iyah that he saw at night won't be soiser the original. There's still a chiyuv to bring the carbon for the original, his first 7 days, first ziva, and now when he finishes the Shiva Nekiyim for the second ziva, he'll have to bring 2 sets of karbonos, one for the first set of 7 days and one for the next set. But Shtayim Balayla, what if the night after the 7th day he saw 2 re'iyahs, the achas b'yoyim, and the third re'iyah was the next day? Then Einoi Mevi, then you say that it was soiser and it's 1 big tumah and he only brings 1 carbon. If you want to argue in your Rabbi Yochanan, like we're saying now, that the night after the 7th is already a time where there's already a chi of carbon, even if the night after the 7th day, the Zav saw 2 new re'iyahs, it shouldn't make a difference, because since he only saw these re'iyahs at night, the 7 days for the first, the Shiva Nekiyim for the first ziva has already been completed. He already had a chi of carbon triggered at night, because Rabbi Yochanan holds Laila Eina Mechusas Man, so the chi of carbon gets triggered at night. And if he sees 2 re'iyahs tonight and another re'iyah tomorrow, that's a whole new set. So he should have to bring 2 karbanos at the end of the second set, 1 to cover the first set and 1 to cover the second set. So it must be that Rabbi Yochanan holds Laila is Mechusar Zman, because if Laila was not Mechusar Zman, then regardless, he should have to bring 2 karbanos. Zok to Gemara, you're right. Kik Amar Rabbi Yochanan L'divrei ha'omer Laila Mechusar Zman. Rabbi Yochanan himself holds that Laila is Eina Mechusar Zman, and since Laila is Eina Mechusar Zman, that's why, going back to the case of the Nazir, as long as the Nazir only became Tamei at night, he has to bring 2 sets of karbanos. And therefore, there's no connection between that and a Chiger on the first day, who would not have to bring a makeup carbon. Here, in the Brisa, where Rabbi Yochanan takes an opinion that seems to say, Laila's Mechusar Zman, that's not his own opinion. That's Rabbi Yochanan saying, if you hold Laila Mechusar Zman, that would be the Allah. If you hold that Laila is Mechusar Zman, then if there were 2 re'iyahs at night, then you would only bring 1 carbon, and it would be 1 big ziva. Frank the Gemara, L'divrei ha'omer pshita. There's no chiddush for Rabbi Yochanan to tell us that if you happen to hold Laila's Mechusar Zman, and therefore, if a Zav had re'iyahs the night after the 7th day, since he's not yet mechuyev his carbon for the first of the re'iyahs, it's 1 big tumah, and he'll only bring one carbon, that's not a chiddush, that's pashut. If Rabbi Yochanan was saying this halacha in his own name, the chiddush is that that's what he holds. He's sharing his opinion. But if he's just telling you that if you happen to hold Lailas Mechusha's Man, this would be the outcome, that's very simple and logical. I don't need Rabbi Yochanan to tell me that. Zok the Gemara, I'll tell you why there's a great chiddush. Because let's think about it. The Brisa made a distinction and said, if you only saw one re'i at night, that would say that you still bring one big carbon. But if you had two re'is at night, if you had one re'i at night, then you bring two carbons. But if you had two re'is at night, then you bring the second carbon. So the question is, what's the difference? If two re'is at night, we say Eine Mevi, because we say it's soiser and it's considered still part of the first set. So one re'iyah should be soiser the same. What's the difference between one re'iyah and two re'iyahs? So that's a very big kasha. And the chiddush of Rabbi Yochanan is the answer to this kasha. What is the answer to this kasha? The answer to this kasha is simple. Rashi says, when someone becomes a zov, the first re'iyah he sees, we do not consider it ziva. We consider him a regular balkari. Only after he sees the second re'iyah do we retroactively say, that original re'iyah that he saw was not keri. Now, being that he saw again, we're going to reclassify that original re'iyah as ziva. So therefore, if he saw one re'iyah at night, the re'iyah itself will say was keri, and it connects to the re'iyahs of tomorrow. And therefore, it's as if he only saw the re'iyah on the 8th day, and therefore he has to bring two karbanos. And that is the chiddush that Rabbi Yochanan is telling us. So Zok the Gemara, Shtayim b'yoyim v'achas b'layla tzrichale. The chiddush is that if there's only one re'iyah at night, and the other two re'iyahs were on the 8th day, there we say he brings two karbanos. So kedai dechamina kat kavta Rab Shisha barei diravidi. In Krisos, where the Gemara discusses this case, Rab Shisha barei diravidi asked a kasha on this svara. And the kasha that he had was, in a regular case of a zov, his first re'iyah, we understand, will be connected to the later two, because the first re'iyah is a real re'iyah, because he wasn't Tomei before. It's a standalone re'iyah. And therefore, if he sees two laters, so if he sees the other two tomorrow, we understand why they're each a separate re'iyah. However, in this case, where he's coming off another ziva, at the time he saw the first re'iyah, that re'iyah was not a re'iyah for itself, because it wasn't a time where he could have a re'iyah, because he was still trying to become tar from the first set of ziva. So therefore, if it's ra achas b'yoyim, we should not say it connects it tomorrow. We should say it's part of today, and therefore he should only bring one carbon. Kamash Shalom could Rabbi Yosef that no, even though he's still finishing up the shvira of his first set, the re'iyah that he sees at night, we're still going to connect to the two re'iyahs that he sees tomorrow, and we'll consider it like he completed and he was mechuyev a carbon for the first set of ziva, and he has to bring now two carbonas, one for the first set of ziva and one for the second set of ziva. So this is a little bit complex, but at the end of the day, the maskana is that we've salvaged our opinion in Rabbi Yochanan, and Rabbi Yochanan in fact holds that since all the days of every Yom Tov are only a tashlumin for the first day, if someone was a chiger on the first day, and therefore he was not mechuyev in Re'iyah on the first day of Yom Tov, he would not be mechuyev in Re'iyah the rest of Yom Tov, because the rest of Yom Tov are only a tashlumin for the first day. Okay, now we're back to the easy Gemara. Avar haregel v'lo echad. What if all Yom Tov long he never brought the Chagiga? Einei chayev b'achar yusay. After Yom Tov, he doesn't have to make it up because it's too late. He lost his opportunity. It's a corruption that cannot be fixed. It's a loss that cannot be counted. Amar le bar Heihe lehil. Bar Heihe asked Hill. The word in the Mishnah is not appropriate for the situation that we're discussing. It shouldn't say lehimonois, counted, lehimolois mibayl. a chisaron that cannot be filled, not a chisaron cannot be counted. So if you're talking about Ava Regel Lechag is a chisaron Layuchal Limonos, it doesn't make sense. It should be a chisaron that's Layuchal Lehimolos. Now, first of all, who was Bar Hehe? So Rashi tells us Bar Hehe was a ger, and gerim are either called Bar Hehe or Ben Bagbag, because Hey is the letter. We know that all gerim we call them Ben Avram or Ben Sarah, and Avram and Sarah are both people who had a Hey added to their name. So we say Bar Hehe, we mean the son of Avram and the son of Sarah, or Ben Bagbag. I'm sorry. Yes, it's the same one. And Ben Bagbag, Bag is Beis Gimel, 2 plus 3 is 5, which is Hey. So Ben Bagbag also stands for the same thing, children of Avram and Sarah. Ella, since the word Lehimonos is not appropriate to describe someone who missed his opportunity to bring a korban chagiga, I would argue that the pasuk is referring to a completely different situation. A whole bunch of friends got together, they were going to do a mitzvah together, and he decided not to join them. So that's what it means. He missed an opportunity, and they'll never be able to join with them for this mitzvah because this mitzvah is already completed. It's not available anymore. Tanya mihachi, what does it mean? Destruction cannot be fixed. Zeshabitel krishma shel shachris or krishma shel arvis. This is someone who was mavatel krishma shel shachris or krishma shel arvis, or shabitel tefillah shel shachris or tefillah shel arvis, or he was mavatel tefillah shel shachris or tefillah shel arvis, and that's a me'uvas l'yichaliska, and he cannot fix that. He can't make up for it. And of course, this means b'mezid, because if it was b'shoigig, if he forgot, we know you could do a tefillas tashlumin. And someone told me a story today that in Poland they made a gzeira that they were forcing schools, even Jewish schools, to have secular education. And the Chavetz Chaim and the Charedim felt that this would be a very terrible thing. So the Chavetz Chaim joined the delegation with the Belzer Rebbe to go speak to the president of Poland to convince him not to enforce it. And they actually succeeded on their mission. But as they're traveling, I'm not sure what they traveled in, but as they're traveling, the Chavetz Chaim's son-in-law was with them, Zach's, and it was getting already late, and the shkia was coming. And he told the shver, the Chavetz Chaim, it's almost shkia, we got to daven mincha. And the shver pushed him off. And then it got really late. It was dark already. And then the Belzer Rebbe said, "Time to daven mincha." So the Chavetz Chaim ended up davening Ma'ariv 2 times because he held that he wasn't Yosy mincha. So his Adam told him, "Chavetz Chaim, shver, how could you daven at Tfilas Tashlumin? You weren't an oynis. I reminded you, and you purposely didn't daven mincha." So the Chavetz Chaim answered, "Covered for the Belzer Rebbe. I'll covered for the Belzer Rebbe. How dare I start mincha before he's ready? Covered for the Belzer Rebbe. That's also an oynis, and therefore I'm allowed to daven at Tfilas Tashlumin." The chisaron lo yuchal imonos ze shemnimnu chaver v'var mitzvah v'ula nimnima. Amalei bar Hehe lahillel. Bar Hehe told Hillel, "My dichsiv." It says in the pasuk in Malachi, "V'shaftem," you'll go back, or isem, you'll see bein tzaddik l'rasha. You'll see between a tzaddik and a rasha, and bein oived elokim lasher lo, and between someone who's an oived elokim and someone who didn't serve Hashem. Frekt ben Hehe to Hillel, "Hainu tzaddik, hainu oived elokim." What is the repetition? A tzaddik and an oived elokim would be the same. Hainu rasha, hainu asher lo yavad. So why is the pasuk using double speed? Amar lei, he told him, no. Avadai v'lo avadai tarvayu tzadiki gemurei. They're both tzaddik. So asher lo avadai is not a rush. Both the avadai and both the lo avadai, both the oived elokim and the not oived elokim, they're both tzaddikim gemurei. So what is the avdai and what's the lo avdai? The einoi daima shoyne pirkai meya palmim l'shoyne pirkai meya v'echad. An oived Hashem is someone who only chazer 100 times. I'm sorry, a non-oived Hashem is someone who only chazer 100 times. An oived Hashem is someone who chazer 101 times. So you're going to ask me for one time. So I want to ask you a question. Did you ever rent a car and bring it back 2 hours late? You pay $60 a day for the car. You bring it back 2 hours late, you pay another $60, even for 2 hours, right? That's not fair. Whenever you have a contract, so you have a good deal, Heaven forbid, if you go over that contract an ounce, you get raped, right? It's like if you have a cell phone plan, you have a certain amount of minutes for a good deal. If you go over by 1 minute, they'll charge you $1,000. Or imagine if you're flying and you're allowed to take one suitcase, you take another suitcase, it's almost the price of a whole ticket, right? That's how things work. It's exactly how it works. Learn from the Uber drivers of the Gemara's time. Asara parsi v'zuzah. If you take a trip that's 10 parsi, they'll charge you 1 zuz. Chad asar parsi. If you go one extra parsi, one extra one, betrays zuzah. They already doubled the fare. So you
we had this Gemara before. We had this explanation though. With the donkey, because it's the wear and tear on the donkey by going a masher who over is
that's what the cell phone companies tell you. That's what the cell phone companies tell you as well. That's what the cell phone companies tell you too, and the airlines tell you also.
We had this, but this came up in a Gemara in the last month. This came up. This whole question of the.
Okay. So this is a very fascinating Gemara. So there's a Klei Yakar. I forgot to bring Mekrois Gedel's Chumash down, but the Klei Yakar says a fascinating thing. He says it in Parshas Veschanon, Perek Dalet Pasuk Tes. It talks about Loishishkach. You shouldn't forget the Torah that Hashem is teaching you. And the Klei Yakar brings down this Gemara, and here's a couple of beautiful things. So first, he says that he heard over that the word Zachar, remember, is 227, right? The Gematria of Zachar is 227. Shachach, forgot, is 328. What is the difference between 328 and 227? 101. So the difference between remembering and not remembering is 101. And then he says, and I want to add my own little gematria. And if you look at the pasuk that we just quoted, the pasuk that we just quoted is the Shaftim Marisim ben Tzadik l'Rasha ben Ovid Elakim la'asher lo yavodu. If you take the Rasha Tevis of lo yavodu, you get Lamed and Ayin. Lamed is 30, Ayin is 70. 100 is lo yavodu. But if you take the first 3 letters, the first letters of the 3 words before that, Ovid Elakim la'asher, that's 101. So Zok the Klei Yakar, Ovid Elakim la'asher, someone who did 101 times, he's David Hashem. He's David Hashem. The Lo Yavodu, the person only has 100, he is not to David Hashem. And the Klei Yakar goes on to say that could be the Malach in charge of remembering. His name is Zachar, and the Malach in charge of forgetting is called Shocheach. And every time you chazer, you knock down a little bit the koyach of the Malach of Shocheach, so that the Malach of Zoicher will help you remember things. That's what the Klei Yakar says. I heard I'll be pashtus. What's the big difference between 100 and 101? Very simple. Whenever you have a milestone that you want to celebrate, I did it 100 times. 101 is not a milestone. 100 is a milestone. So if you do it 100, that's not a ride that's against L'Shem Shemayim. But if you do it an extra time, that's L'Shem Shemayim already, because that's not like a milestone that typically someone would establish. Okay, so that takes us to the next Gemara. Zok to Gemara weiter. Amar le Eliyahu leBarhehe. In those days, it was like casual. Yeah, there's a casual conversation. Eliyahu nobody spoke to Barhehe. But Amar le leBelazar, my dichsev. It says in the pasuk, Hine tziraftich v'lo b'kesef. I forged you not with silver. B'chartich, I purified you. Bikur oini, in the crucible of poverty. Malamed, it teaches us. Shechazer HaKadosh Baruch Hu al kol midos tovos litin Yisrael. HaKadosh Baruch Hu was looking for the best treatment with which to purify Klal Yisrael. V'lei matza ela hanis. All he was able to find, the best thing for Klal Yisrael is poverty. So this is a very hard Gemara to swallow. So Akiva Balter spoke out something beautiful. It doesn't say Malamed Shechazer HaKadosh Baruch Hu al kol klala. It's al kol midos tovos. Aniyus is not a midah. Aniyus is a condition. So why is it calling it a midah? Zokt Akiva that a midah of aniyus doesn't mean poverty. Chas v'sholom, the Rebbe doesn't want us to have poverty. He wants us to have the midah of someone who has poverty, meaning he's thirsty for more. A person has to act like an ani when it comes to learning Torah and doing mitzvahs, that he always needs more. He's desperate to get more and more and more. The midah of aniyas is the best thing. The thirst for Klal Yisrael to continue to learn and to grow, that's the best thing for Klal Yisrael. Yeah, that's the push. I don't like the push shots. I don't like the push shot. And the art scroll brings out from somebody that doesn't mean aniyas. It means every day a person makes panasa, he always runs into difficulties. Things aren't easy. There's always difficulties. But on building on what Akiva said, that the midah of aniyas is the midah of the thirst to learn more, to grow more. This week's parsha, we have a beautiful pasuk. It says, "Ubelev kol chacham leiv nasati chachma." That's a pasuk in this week's parsha. In the heart of a wise heart, I will give wisdom. In Parshas Pinchas, where Hashem selected Yehoshua to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, it says in the pasuk, "Kach es Yehoshua." Hashem told Moshe, "Take Yehoshua, ish asher ruach boy," someone who has ruach. What is ruach? He's not a head counselor. What does it mean ruach? Why? What's the mile of ruach that is befitting for a leader of Klal Yisrael? So the Shipurnu says there, ruach boy muchan lekabel or pnei melachayim. He's prepared to accept the light of the melachayim. Ke'inyin shenemar, like the pasuk says in our parsha this week, ubelev kol chacham leiv nasati chacham. So the obvious kashas on this Shipurnu and on the pasuk, Chaim Shmulovitz asks. First of all, chacham leiv. Did you ever hear someone say, "Boy, does he have a sharp heart"? No, you say he has a sharp mind. A and B is, if someone is already a chacham leiv, if someone's already a chacham, why does he need chacham for it? He already is a chacham. So what is going on over here? And what is this mile that Yeshua had? And the last kasha is, Yeshua was not the biggest Talmud Chacham in Klal Yisrael, because the Ramban tells us that when the Pasuks, the Psukim in Shalach list off the Meraglim, the order of how the Pasuk lists them up was Keseder Chashivusam, of how prominent they were. And Yeshua was not the first, he's not the second, he's not the third, I believe he's the fourth. So what was this special mile of Yeshua? The Chaim Shmulovitz explains that a Chacham Leiv is someone who's a Mavakish Chacham. Think about it. These people were in Mitzrayim for 200 years, they were slaves. They didn't know the fine arts of the special type of weaving and making gold. They had no skill. They were just laborers. They knew how to mix straw and make bricks. But they had such a chukah, they so much wanted to contribute to the Melechas HaMishkan. They so much wanted to participate in the Melechas HaMishkan. They're a Chacham Leiv. Their heart was striving and yearning for these skills so that they can participate. Those people who really wanted, who yearned so much to do the mitzvahs, Hashem gave them those skills. He downloaded those skills to them. And that's what the Torah is talking about when it says Yeshua Isher Shurech Boy. Yeshua might not have been the greatest Talmid Chacham, but he was the one who was always in the Besmedrish. It's brought down. He was always in the Besmedrish, and he was cleaning up, and he stayed late, and he came early, and he was waiting, and he waited 40 days by the foot of the mountain for Moshe Rabbeinu. That's the milah that Yeshua had. He was a Mavakish. And that's the milah of the Midah of Aniyas. A Mavakish, we're always looking for more. Amar Shmuel, the Itema, Rabbi Yosef. Hayin Amar Idji, this is what people say, Ya Aniyus Lidoi, poverty is good for Jews. He bars a sumka l'sisya chiyura, like a red whip to a white horse. The red stands out and makes the whiteness more white when it's compared to the red. So too, Aniyus is something that helps forge Klal Yisrael. But once again, I don't like Pashup Shat. I like learning. Aniyus means the thirst for learning, the quest for growing. Rab Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Eizehu b'ubas lo yuchal liskoin, zeha bo hala erba b'hoiled mimenu mamzer. Frank the Gemara, it's only a ma'ubas lo yuchal liskoin if a child was born from this union. Hoiled in loy hoiled loy. But Tanya Rab Shimon ben Menashe Omer, goin of Adam, if someone steals after shiachser, he can give it back, be a saking, and it will be misaking his problem. Goes Adam after shiachser gzeila, he can give back gzeila be saking. Aval abal eishes ish, but osra labaila nitrid min ha'olam halachloi. So you see, even without a mamzer being born, Just the fact that someone was mizana with an Shish, which made her usher to her husband, that's already a ma'ubas lo yuchal liskay. So why does our Mishnah have to say b'dafke if there was no men mamzer? Rabbi Shimon Yochi said, "Ein oimer." No one ever says bikru gamal. Go check out a camel to see if this camel has a mum because I want to bring it for our carbon. Because a camel is not even in the parsha. Bikru chazir. Go check a chazir to see if it has a mum because I want to bring it for our carbon. Again, no one's going to do that because a chazir is not royal for our carbon. A bikru tleh. What am I examining for a blemish? Something that started off perfect, like a tleh. And that's what we're talking about in this pasuk of Ma'ubas Loichaliskoin. This was someone who was a tleh. He started off good, and then he became bad, and he was perished from the Torah. Rabbi Yehuda Malakish Aimer, I didn't know Rabbi Shimon Malakish had a brother. Rabbi Yehuda Malakish Aimer, call Talmud Chacham, Shapirish from the Torah, any Talmud Chacham who separates from the Torah, all of Akas of Aimer, the pasuk says about him, Ketziper noidedes minkana, just like the bird moves away from the nest. And I saw two pshatim in this, in what we're learning from this pasuk. Either like a tzipor who moves away from his nest, so too is a Talmud Chacham who moves away from the Torah, from his place. He's separated. But I saw another pshat that's referring to the Rebbeinu Shalom. Tzipor nededes minkana, just like a tzipor moves away. If someone moves away from the Torah, ish nodim minkana, ish is referring to the Rebbeinu Shalom who will move away from that person. Well, Aimer, it says in the pasuk, the Navi says, Hashem asks, what did your father see about me bad? That Klal Yisrael distanced themselves from me. But I'll call upon him. We just quoted a verse that it says that Amuvas Loichal is someone who was Mizana with an Shish, even though there's no mamzer born. So if there was a Choisei Pnuya, so then there is no Baal there to become usher. So it's only a muvas loyichaliskoin if someone was mizana b'choyzip pnuya and she had a child. But if it was an eshish, in fact, the fact that she's usher l'bayla, that's enough to be qualified as a muvas loyichaliskoin. Maybe both cases are an eshish. But like kasha kanda oinis, the rise that it says that it has to be a child. That's if it was if she was raped, if she was forced, and then she would not be usher l'bayla. So it's only a muvas loyichaliskoin if there's a child born. And kanberatzen, and the brisa that says that even if there's no child born, it's a muvas loyichaliskoin, is if she was willing, and therefore she's usher l'bayla. Both were speaking by anointis, but a Eishes Kohen is usher to her husband even though she was nenas. Now we're darshaning another pasuk. It says, someone who leaves and comes, there's no peace for such a person. Who are we referring to? Amarav. If someone was learning Dvar Halacha, he was learning a Libud Hilchasa, learning the Mishnayos and the Gemaras and learning the Psak, and then he decides that he wants to take a vacation, and he just wants to learn Chumash Rashi, Mikra, Shuv Ein Lo Shalom, because now he won't be able to learn Torah Libud Hilchasa. Or Shmuel Amar, Zah Parish with Talmud Mishnah. This is someone who was learning Gemara until now, getting a clear understanding of what the Mishnah meant, and he decides he's going back to learning only Mishnayos. Once again, he's giving up an important level where he would get a full understanding of what the Mishnah means. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, Afilu Mishas L'Shas. Even if you switch from Bavli to Yerushalmi, from Yerushalmi to Bavli, it's also a terrible thing. And Rashi says, why? Bavli is much deeper. It's much deeper, and therefore it's harder to understand. So you're giving up a lot of understanding of Torah. He put me into darkness. Shas Bavli is dark and hard to understand. I don't know. I tried learning Yerushalmi. It's much harder. Yeah.
Whatever you're using.
No, but it seems like, I guess Yerushalmi is more straightforward if you understand the language.
It says the Maharsha says that the Bavli doesn't always come to a conclusion.
To a conclusion.
The Amorim don't always come to a conclusion, but the
that's a good
the Yerushalmi comes to.
Okay, Yishmak, that's a good shot. Okay, so Tosfos brings on Rashi's pshat, and then he brings on a story that Reb Zera would fasted that he should forget the Shas Bavli to remember, so that his mind is clear for the Yerushalmi. But then maybe you could say it's the opposite. Maybe what it means is it's not necessarily the fact that he's switching to Babli or to Yerushalmi that's a problem, but in between, you're blind, that's where there's a problem. Okay, let's see the Gemara Vayta. Heter Nadarim, Parchin Ba'avir. The concept that if someone makes a neder, he can be shoyal on the neder and the chacham can be matered. There's no strong base to it from the Torah, so therefore it's parchem ba'aver. It's flying in the air. It's. Rashi says the chacham said you could mater, but ma'at remez yesh b'mikra. There's a slight remez. Ve'ein al ma'lismach. Elo shekein maser the chacham b'Torah shabbat peh. We don't really have a good anchor from the words of the Torah to refer to this concept. It's very much from Torah shabbat peh. Hilchos Shabbos, Chagigos, V'Me'ilos, Hilchos of Shabbos of the Chagiga and Me'ilos. And the reason why this mission is even here is only because we're just trying to mention that the halachas of the Chagiga are very vague, and once the Tanya talks about it talks about all the different levels of vagueness. So again, Hilchos Shabbos, Chagigos, V'Me'ilos, Harayim Kaharar Matfurim B'Saira. There's massive halachas that there's just a snippet of mention of it in the Torah. Shehein mikra muat. There's a very little in the psukim about them, but halachas merubois, but many halachas referring to it. Hadinin like choshe mishpat, vavodos and vavoda, hatahayros, vatmeos, va'arayis. Their yesh lamamashi yismuch. There the Torah elaborates on them quite a bit. The hein gufay Torah. They are the gufa Torah, and Rashi says the Gemara is going to explain what that means because every mitzvah is gufa Torah. Zok the Gemara. Tanya, we learned, Rabbi Eliezer argues on our mission. And Rabbi Eliezer says that HaTorah Nadarim is very much yesh lahem amashi yismachu. There's definitely psukim that tell us about HaTorah Nadarim. And it's not porchen ba'avir. And where do you know HaTorah Nadarim from? Shenemar, it says kiyafli in the parsha of Nadarim and kiyafli in the parsha of Naziris. Why would the Torah repeat kiyafli? Kiyafli means when you articulate something, when you articulate your commitment. So why would it need to repeat the word kiyafli by Naziris if it's like a nether? Why does it say it again? One is when you're articulating the nether to be makabel upon yourself the restriction. And the other one is when you're articulating to the chacham, why, had you known the outcome of your nether, you would never have made it. And Rashi says, the first articulation is when you articulate the Isser. You go back and you articulate in front of the Chacham, and you say, I did make this nether, but I made it based on a certain premise. But for a different premise, I didn't make the nether. And in fact, the premise that I wasn't considering is what occurred, and that's why I have charata. That's how he comes to be mater his nether. That was Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, I see a makar for HaTorah Nadarim in a different place in the Torah. I swore in my anger. Mashma, that since I swore in my anger, it's not really a good shvuah. I swore, but then I was chayzer. Tosfos asks, what do you mean I was chayzer? If the shvuah was, Tosfos assumes, it's Rabbeinu Elchanan who asked the kasha. Im Yevoin al Menuchasi. Pashup Pshat, he swore if I'm going to bring them into Klal Yisrael about the Dor HaMidbar. So in fact, Hashem did not chayzer. How could you say Hashem nishpati b'avi nishpati b'chazarti? In fact, the Rebbeinu Shalom was not chayzer. They didn't go into Eretz Yisrael. So Tosfos says that what the Ri brings down is that maybe it's referring to Olam Haba, and we know that the Dor HaMidbar did go into Olam Haba. Okay, Be'er Rabbi Yitzchak Omer, Yesh Lam Mashi Yismachu. Be'er Rabbi Yitzchak had a different makar for HaTorah Nadarim. Shenemar Kol Nadiv Liboy. It says by the Mishkan, who brought to the Mishkan someone who was in Divlei. It doesn't say anybody you promised that they would give. It says whoever was in Divlei, meaning even if you promised, but you lost your will to give, you're no longer in the Divlei, you wouldn't have to give. Only if you're in the Divlei when you're actually giving. So once again, you see a person could be matter nether. Chananya ben Achi Rabbi Yeshua Aimer. Chananya, the nephew of Rabbi Yeshua, said, Yesh Lamash Yisrael Shenemar. David HaMelech said, Nishpati ba'akayema, I swore and I fulfilled my shvua, lishma mishpeh tzedkecha. Why did David have to say, I swore and I fulfilled? Because obviously it's optional. He didn't have to fulfill, but he's claiming that he did fulfill. So you see, you could be trial in the nether. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, you have all these different opinions as to where you see a Torah Shador in the Torah. If I was there, Amri Lahu, I would have told you all, my pshat that I'm going to share with you shortly is better than all of your pshat. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, when you make a neder, lo yachel devara, you're not allowed to disgrace your words. Who ain't the person who made the neder can. But you can go to a chacham, and a chacham could be matter your neder. Why is this pshat so much better than all the other pshatim? Every single pshat that we said so far, we can ask a kash on and slug up. Levarmi de Shmuel, except for Shmuel Svar v'Yachal Devarai, the less lepircha. That there's no way to slug it up. What did Rabbi Eliezer say? Rabbi Eliezer said it says kiyafli twice, once by neder and once by naziris, and the second yafli is when you're articulating why you don't want the neder anymore. But that's not necessarily what kiyafli means. Maybe what you learn out of the word kiyafli by nazir is a separate halacha. The Tanya Rabbi Yehuda, I remember Mishum Tarfin, La'olam ein nechad be'em nazir, shalanit in naziris el laflo. Yankel and Beryl are sitting on the park bench, and they see from a distance Shmuel approaching. And Yankel says, if Shmuel is a nazir, I don't know if he's a nazir, we'll ask him. But if he's a nazir, I want to be a nazir too. And Beryl said, you know what? I say the opposite. If Shmuel is not a nazir, then I want to be a nazir. So Shmuel is either a nazir or not a nazir. So one of these two guys should be a nazir. Eventually Shmuel comes and they ask him, are you a nazir? He'll either say yes or no. Zok the Gemara, neither of these people are a nazir. You know why? Even though for a regular neder, you can make a t'nai, when it comes to naziris, when you accept upon yourself the naziris, it cannot be unclear. It has to be crystal clear. And when these two people made their proclamations, if Shmuel's a nazir, I'll be a nazir. Or if Shmuel's not a nazir, I'll be a nazir. It's not clear if that's a commitment at that moment. And therefore he won't be a nazir. So the extra kiyafli that it says by naziris is to tell you that by naziris there has to be an extra level of clarity in the acceptance of the naziris. So therefore you don't have a raya from here that you could be soil on another. Imi Rabbi Yeshua said, it says Asher Nishpati Ba'api, right? Which tells you that since I swore in my anger, I'm not going to fulfill it. But that's not necessarily the only way to interpret those words. Ba'api Nishpati, I made a shvuah and I was not chayzer. So you don't have a raya from there. Imi Rabbi Yitzchak, who says that it says in the pasuk, Kol Nediv Leiv, Dilma Lafukim in the Shmuel. Maybe Kol Nediv Leiv isn't telling you that you could be chayzer. It's telling you that we shouldn't pass like Shmuel. Damar Shmuel said, Gomar Beliboy, if someone in his heart accepted upon himself a neder, it doesn't do anything. If he has to articulate, he has to speak it out. And maybe Kol Nediv Leiv teaches us that that's not true. Even if you didn't articulate. And Toshis makes it very clear that everybody agrees that Gomer Belev is good. So Toshis says over here, Lav Mishum the lesser Shmuel Gomer Beliboy. Shmuel doesn't hold that you really have to speak it out. Avada he holds if you just accept it in your heart, it's also a Kabbalah. The Kruxin, Elamuki Bakachim Bazora who dechsiv Haikra, he learns that what type of Kabbalah could you make without articulating? Only Kachim. But a regular neder, I'm going to eat apples, I won't eat apples, that has to be spoken out. But we would learn from Kol Nediv Leiv that any type of neder has to be, we would learn that any neder you could be belayed. And Shmuel would hold Dafke Kachim could be belayed. So that knocks off Rabbi Yitzchak's raya from Kol Nediv Leiv. And Imi de Chananya ben Ache Rabbi Yeshua, who said that David HaMelech said Nishbati Bakayema. Since David had to say Bakayema, you can't take it for granted that someone makes a nether, he has to fulfill it. That's not shot in the puzzle. Dilma Kirav Gidol, Amarav, Amarav Gidol, Amarav, Minayin Shinishboin Lakaimis a mitzvah. How do you know that you can make a shvua to be mizar yourself? You make a shvua that I'm going to do a certain mitzvah, so that it will encourage you to do it. How do you know you're allowed to do such a thing? So all of these psukim that the different Amoraim brought as a makar, that there's something called Ataras Nedarim, we've deflected because there's a possible other pshat, alternate pshat to learn from these psukim. But Shmuel's halacha v'layachal devarei, there's no alternate pshat. It's in the bank that you could be shoyal by a chacham. So Amar Rav B'Temer Rab Nachman Yitzchak, Hain Yuda Amri Inshi. This is what the people say. Tava chade papalta charifta. One sharp pepper will give better flavor to a large dish. Mimali tani de curry, rather than a full pot of cucumbers. One small pepper will give more flavor. So to Shmuel's sharp little vart of Yachal Devarai is more impactful than all of the other svaros. Hilcha Shabbos. So the Mishnah says that Hilcha Shabbos are harorim hatluyim b'sayra. Frank Gemara, what do you mean? Michtav ksivan. There's a lot of psukim in the Torah that discusses Hilcha Shabbos. How could you call it harorim hatluyim b'sayra? There's more than just a snippet of information about Shabbos in the Torah. So we're speaking about one very specific halacha. There's one very specific halacha that we're discussing that's not mentioned too much in the Torah. L'chadar Rab Abba. The Amar Rab Abba, hachofer guma b'Shabbos. The halacha is, if you dig a hole in a field in the ground, you're chayiv a melacha deraisa. It's called charisha. You're being chayrish. You're preparing the land for planting, or it could be binyan. If you're digging because you're going to be building something. So the malachas deraisa. But what if I didn't intend to build, nor did I intend to plow? My intention was I needed some earth. I needed some earth to cover over something. So my intention isn't to do the malacha. Rather, my intention is to benefit from a side effect of the malacha. Pater Allah. That's not chayiv. You're pater. Kiman, who is that consistent with? Reb Shimon, the Amar Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa Pater Allah. Shimon says a Malacha Shein Tzricha Legufa is Pater. So Reb Shimon, his case, where Reb Shimon expressed his case was when there's a mace in the house, and you need to get the mace out of the house. So you're taking it out from the house to Rosh Hashanah, so there's Haitzah. Reb Shimon knows that would be Pater, because the reason why you're taking the mace out isn't because you want to bury the mace. You just want to get rid of the mace. You don't want it to be in your house. So that's a malacha shein tzricha legufa, and therefore you're patur.
Why just? Yossi, why just that one? All of the av malachas are learned through a drasha. They're not explicit in the Torah.
But this doesn't say anything anywhere about it.
The only one has got to be other.
And we're gonna soon see why this is different than other halachas that we learn out of a drush. The Gemara is going to make it very clear.
Okay,
why
it's different, but the others are, the av
so
malacha.
the fact that
us
it's
not.
learned out of a drasha isn't why it's called harar matluim b'sayra. There's another issue here that makes this less.
Like the statement of Shabbos, and it means this one fine.
Well, that you always find that with the Mishnah we make in the kibbutz.
Out of 100, 1,000.
I hear. So let's delve a little bit into this case.
There's
of the
only
mace.
one lav. I think it's in this week's parsha or next week's
Havara.
parsha. Yeah.
Havara, right? The Shabbos lav yatzis l'chalik yatzis. That's right. Okay, so let's see what the case of the mace, because this is a very yesodistic important Rashi. She'ein tzricha legufa, Rashi 4 lines from the bottom towards the end of the line. Kagoyin zeh she'ein tzarich lebinyan zeh. Now, Reb Shimon Amar Milsei, Reb Shimon said his halacha of malacha she'tzrich legufa pater gabi moitzi es a mace b'mita l'koyver b'Shabbos. If someone takes a mace from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah to bury him on Shabbos, the Amar Reb Shimon pater al hoitzazu. the malacha of Haitzah from Rosh Hashanah to Rosh Hashanah, you're potter for that. Why? Because it's a malacha shen shricha legufa. Rashi here, these next lines are very, very important very important words. Shebritzaynai loyhaisa ba'ela. I would rather there's no mace at all. So this whole situation I don't like. I didn't need to do this Haitzah. I'd rather there was no mace and I wouldn't need to do Haitzah at all. So therefore, it's a malacha shen shricha legufa. That's what Rashi learns. This is going to be very, very troublesome. Very, very troublesome. But let me just hold on for a second. Zoktamar Filu Tema.
He doesn't want to. He
I
don't
understand,
want
but
to.
I'd rather not the situation. That's not what the Torah is Machai before. But I'll elaborate that in a second. Zoktamar Filu Tema Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of digging, even Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you take the mace at your chayiv, in the case of digging, and you only need the earth, even he's moida, that is potter. Why? Because hasa misakin hachamakalta. By the mace, when you're taking it out, you're improving the situation. But when you're digging a hole in the ground, you're messing up the ground. You're making a hole in it. Okay. So now let's delve a little bit into what Dovi's asking. So Rashi's saying, why is it potter? Because I'd rather not have the situation. Sure, now that the mace is there, I want it out. But I'd rather there was no mace in the first place. Frank Toishvis, you cannot say that that's a reason to be potter. And let's turn over on the Amavez for a minute, just to see Toishvis at the top of Amavez. Here's Rashi. Why is it in Shricha L'Guf and why is it a potter? B'min malacha zayis shebritzaynai lahaya binyan zemayaylam. I would rather that this wasn't here at all. I would rather it's not here at all. Zok Toishvis, this makes no sense. Below you talking, how could you say that? There's many malachas that we know for sure you're chayav for, where you can have the same argument. You have a wall that you're knocking down because you want to build a new wall. Everybody holds that's chayav because it's binyan. You're breaking something down to prepare it to build over there. But according to Rashi's logic, lama machayiv. If it was up to me, I'd rather not pay for the demolition. I'd rather there was no wall there and then have to pay for demolition. But Rashi's logic, that since I would rather this whole scenario wasn't there, according to Rashi's logic, this should be potter. If you tear a beged because you need to sew it up, you have to modify it. I never wanted to tear it. I'd rather it wasn't this way in the first place. Or the kareya habab evloi, if someone Rashi screams an oval, or he tears a beged to scare people to show that he's angry or something. All those things he'd rather not do it. Yet all those places are chayiv. Zok Toishvis, I have a different shot in malacha shen shricha legufa. L'chein nira lari lefarish that the definition of malacha shen shricha legufa is she'eni tzarech leikar shayrish ha'isr. I don't need the malacha that this is. I just need a byproduct of the malacha. Like here, she'eni tzarech leguma. I'm digging a hole, which is the malacha, but I don't need a hole. Shehi malacha. I just need the byproduct of the hole. I need the earth. And the same thing if you take a mace out in the mita. I don't need the haitzah. I just need to get rid of the mace. I don't need the mace to be outside. I just need it not to be here. The harbi the chashiv perakam etzniya v'loy damu, and what's the clincher? The clincher is v'loy damu l'mechas hamishkan. These aren't similar to the malachas of the Mishkan. We know that all of the malachas of Shabbos are malachas that did in the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan, all of the malachas that we're talking about in the Mishkan were done for their primary purpose. So Yisrichan le'ikra malacha. They needed mechabe, they needed to put out fires, because they needed the coals. V'tzeidas chashim v'chalazayin, they needed to capture chashim for their hide, or chalazayin for their dye. So whenever you do a malacha, and the intent of what you're trying to accomplish with the malacha is not actual malacha, it's a byproduct. That's the definition of a malacha shenshich legufa. That's potter according to Rabbi. So Zok to Gemara, my karor natluim b'sayra. Why is this malacha shenshich legufa considered haror matluim b'sayra? Mountains that hang on a fine hair. In other words, the mashma sheyesh tzas remez min haTorah l'lamidze. Umar remez. Where do you find a remez to the fact that a malacha shen shricha legufa is potter? Where do you see a remez to that in the Torah? Zok to Gemara, we know it because maleches machsheves asur Torah. When it comes to Shabbos, a malacha is only asur if you calculated that you wanted to do that malacha. but it doesn't say that anywhere by Shabbos. You know where it mentions Melechas Machshavas? It mentions it in Parshas Vayakel when it's talking about what the Melechas in the Mishkan were. In the Mishkan, it was a Melechas Machshavas. And we're applying, just like the Melechas in the Mishkan are Melechas Machshavas, so too, all the Melechas of Shabbos are also only Melechas Machshavas. So since Melechas Machshavas also Torah, Umelechas Machshavas like Siva, and it doesn't say Melechas Machshavas beferish by Shabbos. It only mentions it by B'nai Mishkan. That's why it's Torah Matluim B'Sairo, because it's just a hair of a smidgen of information about it.
Thinking that you know what you're doing is wrong also, or just you had the intention to do this thing, you didn't know it was wrong.
Well, if you didn't know it's wrong, then it's show you. But it still has to, you still have to have an intention to do this thing. Chagigos. I had a very scary situation today where I did a malacha dairaisa that was not a malachas machshavas. I'm still shooken up by it. Middle of Shal Shudas, people came running upstairs. In the middle of Mincha, people came running upstairs saying that there's a terrible gas smell in the shul. So I go downstairs to the kitchen, and in fact, there was a burner that was on full blast, and it wasn't lit. So it's literally pissing a lot of gas into the building. That could be very, very dangerous. So there's no fire there. So what's the big deal? I'll turn the valve off. But the genius didn't grab the right valve. And instead of turning off that valve, I turned on the fire on Shabbos. I'm going crazy. I mean, it wasn't a Melechas Machshavas. It was like I was totally not interested in lighting a fire, but I'm very, very shooken up by it. On my second try, I found the right valve and I shut it off. So I'm still suspected from it. I don't know. I hope. I don't think I'm going to bring a chatas because I didn't even want to turn on the fire. I was trying to turn off a valve. I don't know, but I was very shooken up. I got very upset, and I found that the kids were playing, and they blew out the flame because of that. Okay, Zakta Gemara weiter. Chagigos. Practically more Michtov Ksivan. Michtov Ksivan. The pasuk talks about Chagiga. We learned about it. It says v'chagoyis moisai. So we know the pasuk talks about Chagiga. So why would you say that's her matli b'sayra? Zakta Malatricha l'chad Amar Papa Labai. Papa asked Abaye, how do you know v'chagoyis moisai? Chag Hashem. How do you know that means a carbon? Maybe it just means you should party, make simchas. Who said it's a carbon shlomim? Maybe chuga chaga kamar rachmana. Elamayatam. I'll show you a different makor for chagiga. Tichsiv Moshe and Aaron told Parai Hashem wants us to come v'yachayu li b'midbar and make a chag. So there it's karbanis. Hachanami, are you going to more Hachanami? There you could also say the chayu chagavu. Who said Hashem was asking for karbanis? Maybe Hashem just wanted him to make a simcha. V'chitema Hachanami, and if you want to say, in fact, that's what it was. V'aksiv v'yomer Moshe. Moshe told Parai, not only you're letting us go, you're sending us with supplies. Gamata hitein biyadenu zavachim v'oilos. So you see, it's karbanis. Zok to Gemara, lav davka. Who said it was karbanis there? Maybe this is what the Rebbeinu Yisrael wanted from Klal Yisrael. Ichlu v'shusu, eat and drink. V'chaygu chaga kamay. And maybe the zvachim over there aren't zvachim of karbanis. Maybe it just means you're going to have meat there so that you can achlu v'shasu, so you can party. Zok to Gemara, loy sol kadaita. It's not mistaber to say that the v'chagos and moisei chag Hashem is not a carbon. Why not? There's an Isser Lina. You're not allowed to leave the Chalev overnight. Now, Isser Lina is only by a carbon. By a regular chulun animal that you shech, there's no Isser Lina. The chugahu, if you're going to learn it's just partying, tarba lachaga is like on a regular party without meat, is there going to be Chalev? Zakta Gemara, v'dil ma'achikam rachman. Maybe this is what the pasuk means. Chalev haba bisman chag lo yalan. Maybe the pasuk is trying to tell you that if you bring chalev, in other words, the chalev of the carbon, Yom Tov time, if you bring a carbon, you happen to bring a carbon on Yom Tov, you should make sure not to leave it over for noiser. Frank the Gemara, you think there's a special halacha that noiser is only osir on Yom Tov? Noiser is osir all the time. Elamayata habab is man chag huda lo yalin. Ha the chol hashana kula yalin. Are you going to suggest that the pasuk is telling you that the Isser to leave over karbanos is only on Yom Tov? The pasuk says kol halayla ada boiker. Every day of the week, a carbon cannot be left overnight. Zok Gemara, maybe we have two. Dilma Imayahu, if you only had kol halayla ada boiker, havamina haula say. Kol halayla ada boiker is on mitzvah to say that you have to burn the karbanos before the morning, but there's no loisa set. So kasav achmana hai lalav. That's why it says layol chelav chagi, because the Torah wants it to be a lav as well. Frank Gemara lalav. I don't need this pasuk for a lav. I have another pasuk. Kasav karachrina. It says v'layol minabasar asher tizbach ba'erev b'yom rishon labayker. So we already have a lav. So it doesn't make sense to say v'layol chelav chagi is a lav for noisa. Zok Gemara, why not? The dilma laver alav bishnei lavin vasei. Maybe the Torah wants it to be two lavin to leave something over for nicer, and in the same. So therefore, we don't yet have a place where we can say that there's a clear anchor in the Torah for the mitzvah of bringing a chagiga. Eliasya midbar midbar. We're going to learn a gzeir shava from the word midbar to the word midbar. Midbar. It says by Mitzrayim. They said v'yachaygu by midbar. And it says in the Navi, in Amos, I believe, Hasavachem u'mincha higashtem li b'midbar. Did you bring karbanis for me in the midbar? So the same way the word b'midbar in Amos is referring to karbanis, so too when it says v'yachaygu li b'midbar, it means karbanis. You see, chayg means midbar. Malahlan zavachem, just like over there in the Navi, it's talking about karbanis. Afkan zavachem, so too v'yachaygu li b'midbar means you're going to bring karbanis. So, Frank the Gemara, if that's the case, you have a solid Gzeir Shava to clearly illustrate that there's a mitzvah to bring a carbon shlomim on Yom Tov, the carbon chagiga, to make a harar matlim b'sayra. So why is this harar matlim b'sayra? This is very, very well founded with a great foundation. We have a Gzeir Shava. So Gemara, but the Gzeir Shava is from Novi. Divrei Torah midivrei Kabbalah lo yalfinan. A Gzeir Shava from Novi is not a real Gzeir Shava. That's why we call it Aurora Matlim B'Sayra, because we learned this whole halacha of Chagiga, and the basis for it is a Gzeir Shava from Novi, which is very, very not concrete support. Me'ilais. The halacha is that if someone is moil behektish, he has to bring a carbon, and he has to pay a chaimish. This is all Aurora Matlim B'Sayra. Frank Tamar, what do you mean? Michtav Ksivan. The pasuk talks about Me'ilah in depth. Amar Rabbi Bar Chama, we're talking about a very specific halacha of me'ilah that's not in the Torah of the forest. Reuven has money of hektish, and he gives it to Shimon, and he tells Shimon, please go to Yorkdale and buy me a shirt. If the shliach follows Reuven's instruction and buys the shirt, Balabayismo, Reuven will be moil. What if Shimon didn't buy a shirt? He bought something else, which Reuven didn't ask him to buy for him. Then shliach mo. Then the shliach is acting on his own behalf, and he's going to be moil. Frank the Gemara. If Shimon went and bought the shirt as Reuven instructed him to do, why is Reuven the one who's over the Avera? Could it be that Shimon did Avera by buying the shirt? And Reuven, who's the Mishalech, should be chayiv? Do we not say in Shliach L'Varver? No, he didn't. But he did Aver. But the Gemara is going to get to your story in a second. But at the end of the day, how ain't Shliach L'Varver? That's very unusual. So Gemara, Hainu Karar Netlim B'Sayra. That's why it's Harar Netlim B'Sayra, because we're saying here that even though ain't Shliach L'Varver, in this case, the Mishalech is chayiv. Amar Rabba, my question. What's the problem with this arrangement that Reuven's going to be chayiv? Dilma shiny me'ilah. We do have a very strong support that yesh shlichus for me'ilah. Me'ilah is different. The yalfa chet mitruma. We learned chet from truma, and by truma mahasam shluch shalad mekamoisay. Just like by truma, if you make a shliach to take off truma for you, the shlichus works. Afkan, so too by me'ilah shluch shalad mekamoisay. So again, what halach in me'ilah has no strong evidence in the Torah. What happens if Reuven sends Shimon with money to buy him a shirt? Reuben thought that this money that he sent with Shimon was chulun money. And then he realized, I took the money from the hektish drawer. You know what? I'm nullifying the shlichus. I don't want Shimon to do it for me anymore. But he didn't WhatsApp Shimon to tell him to abort. So Niskar Balabayas, Niskar Shliach. The Balabayas aborted the mission, but he didn't notify the Shliach. Then the Shliach is mal. Frank the Gemara, Duvis Kasha, Shliach on you, Mike Ovid. What did the poor Shliach do? He had no idea. So, and yet he's still chayiv. Hainu kaharorin atloyim b'sayra. That's harorin atloyim b'sayra, that the Shliach chayiv, even though he's completely innocent. Omer Bashi, Frank Bashi, my kusha. Why is that such a very thing to understand? Dilma midi dahava amoitzi mois hektish l'chulin. Whenever you are moitzi mois hektish l'chulin, even if you don't know about it, you're automatically chayiv for meila. So let's stop over here, and we will be mamshech and mitzvah tomorrow. It's quite late. No, even if the Baal didn't know, and said no, it's chulin, he's still chayiv. That's why meila is very chiddush. That's why Torah Tlum Messiah. It's a chiddush to halacha, and there's no basis for it.
Go ahead.
Everybody have a good tavach.
Good.